Hello, I'm Keith Bensel and I'm from Rooftops and Rent Rolls. And today we're going to do a video. We're going to break down 10 bulletproof pieces that you need to have in your residential leases. And what I mean by this is these are types of things that you can add to your lease to help cement the fact that you're charging a certain price or you're charging a certain fee or the language is written correctly, so therefore, when you go to court for any reason, whether it be you're evicting a tenant or you're trying to recoup charges or the tenant sues you for something, the language is set up correctly. And this is not, an intensive list. I'm giving you 10 pointers that might help you on your residential rental properties. These are things I've tried and also have talked to other property managers and owners who have tried them and it has worked for them. I hope you can find value in it yourself in your rental properties. The number one is a pre-move out clause. So if you require in your lease that the tenant must have a pre-move out inspection, this is prior to them turning in the keys. This is prior to them actually moving out of the property. And so that's why we call it a pre-move out inspection. So basically, they have to schedule with you a pre-move out inspection 48 to 72 hours prior to vacating. This way you can inspect the entire property and you can tell them the things that are going to be held against them on their security deposit. You're giving them 2 to 3 days to resolve any issues prior to them even vacating the property. And so some things they might damage on their way out the door, right? And you can just obviously state that, prove that through your photos that you do on your pre-move out inspection. And you can also prove it by your move-in inspection, and then you have multiple backings for your position and why you're charging a tenant something on their move-out inspection. I think it's very important to do. You can be lazy and say, I'm not going to do pre-move out inspections, it's too much work or whatever. But all you need is one time where it saves you $3,000, and I guarantee you the 15 minutes it costs you to do a pre-move out inspection is not going to hurt you. So I recommend you do them. The next thing is, for many, many years, and I often find myself still accidentally saying it this way, but don't call fees a deposit. Many, many, many times, even large apartment complexes say we charge a $250 non-refundable pet deposit. And the thing is, many judges have started ruling that deposits are just that. You can't call something a deposit if you never have an intention to return it to a tenant. Those are fees. So make sure you're changing your language on your lease and your marketing pieces to make sure that if you ever have to go to court over someone wanting their deposit back, that you don't run into that same issue as other landlords have been running into. So don't call something a deposit if it's not a deposit. If it's not refundable, say it's a non-refundable fee. Don't call it a deposit. That simple word can change everything. The next thing is, a lot of times we have our leases, right? They're it's a 12-month lease, or some people do 14-month leases, 18-month leases. Some people do 10-month leases. And so whatever you choose, I've always done 12 months. And whatever you choose to do, typically what we automatically set it up for, right, is for it to go month to month after the full 1 year term. The thing that a lot of people miss is making sure you have that built-in rental increase at the duration of the 12-month lease. And so when you're signing your leases, have it already built into your lease that if they stay after the 12 months, this is the new rate. So this way, they're already agreeing to it 12 months in advance. There's no surprises there. They sign the lease and they have it. So, whether it's $20 increase or it's $10 or it's $50, you tell them right up front that you're going to give them an increase if they remain month to month. And so some people do it where they really drastically increase the rent because they at the end of the lease because they want them to sign a whole new lease. So if they say, hey, your rent's going up $85, but then, 90 days out, they're telling them, hey, it's going to go up 90, but if you signed a new lease, I'm only going to raise it $50 if you stay. And so people see that, savings and immediately sign for a whole nother year instead of staying month to month. It's just, it looks better on your rent rolls. It looks better when you're trying to refinance a property if all of your tenants aren't month to month, right? You want to really limit the month to month. It makes a stronger impression to a bank and lenders and things that you're staying on top of your leases and not just being lazy and letting them go month to month. There's advantages to being month to month, of course, but it just strengthens certain parts of the scenario, right? And so another thing is we've seen an explosion of Airbnb properties and Verbo and all of these. And we've had a lot of people starting a whole business just built on you don't have to buy a property to own an Airbnb. And they're like, well, what do I have to do? You go and rent someone else's property, and you're essentially subletting that property through those platforms, those short-term rental platforms. And the thing is most landlords insurance policies do not cover you for short-term rentals. So if something happens at that property and you're aware that your property's on these platforms and they're subletting this property, you never agreed to a sublet, you've never agreed to your property being put on any of those platforms, or maybe you did. But the problem is your insurance doesn't cover you because your policy is not written to allow short-term rentals in your property. Make sure that if you are going to do it, you're charging a premium to cover that increased insurance that you're going to need to carry. But I say for the purpose of this, we're doing a bulletproof checklist for your leases. If if you go on the mindset of you're not going to allow it, and you keep your insurance expense down, make sure it's built into your lease. No subletting and no Airbnb or Verbo allowed. The next thing is and this has been on most leases for a long, long time, but make sure you have the right of entry clarity. So make sure when you need to get in to do maintenance, you only have to do a 24-hour notice or 40, whatever is required by your municipality. Ours is 24 hours. And so make sure that's built into your lease. Make sure you're allowed to give a 24-hour notice or whatever is required in your jurisdiction. Make sure that's built into your lease so that you can get access to the property whenever you need to. The next thing is HVAC maintenance. And so that's something that can cost us a lot of money, right? So say you have, your heating system go out in the middle of winter because it wasn't properly maintained. So the tenant's not changing the filter and maybe you're not either. And now that thing gets clogged up and costs you a hefty repair bill. Or better yet, it totally blows up the unit, right? Blows out compressors, whatever happens as a result of that. And make sure you're putting the right size air filters in too. I've had people where they changed the air filters, they put smaller ones in and they ended up down inside of the unit and cost a hefty repair bill. So make sure that your filters are being changed. The best thing to do for the purpose of this video where we're talking about a bulletproof lease, so make sure you have it built into the lease that the tenants are required to change the filters and specifically put in there the number of days between each filter change. So whether you require them to do it every month, every 90 days, whatever, make sure it's built into your lease that they have to do that. And then any repairs as a result of not changing the filters would fall on the tenant as a neglect. The same as you might put in your lease that they have to mow the lawn. And if they don't mow the lawn, you're going to charge them for that, right? So the same thing goes with a filter change. It takes them 2 seconds to change it. And the best way to do is set up with a service like Second Nature or someone who will automatically mail the filters to their door. And you can Some owners I've seen charge them for that service every month. So they advertise the rent at 1,200, but it's 1,250 with a filter delivery to your door. And so that's basically trying to make sure that um, it's trying to make sure that the filters are being changed, and you can charge them if they're not changing those filters. The next thing is utility transfer. This again has been in many leases, but I see many landlords still doing it, and I don't understand why. You need to verify that utilities are put into their name prior to them ever receiving a key. A lot of landlords have the landlord agreement with their utility companies, and so they get charged for the utilities while the tenant's in the property. And so that's, you need to verify, and you need to make sure that that utility is in their name. They can't put it in somebody else's name and then move in. The problem is that other person can call at any time and shut that utility back off. The thing is, it's more than likely that the tenant isn't going to call and shut that utility back off, right? Because they're living there and they know they need that utility. But some friend who got an argument and pulls it out of their your tenants, turns off your tenants' utilities because they got into an argument. That's an issue. Make sure it's in their name and you actually have the confirmation in writing for every single utility. Don't let don't let that slide. I've seen many times where it came back to bite you because you didn't do it. So just make sure the utilities are in the tenant's name prior to giving them the keys. They can't move in until that happens. The next thing is attorney fees. And so this is another piece of language that I think I've seen most leases do have that in there, but it's important to verify your lease does. So in the event that you sue the tenant and you have to go to court, you might want an attorney to represent you, especially depending on your municipality. For example, if you live in the DMV, DC metro area, most likely, I recommend that you use an attorney because it speeds up the process. You make sure all the laws are covered. You don't, it's a long enough process in that area. You don't want to drag it on. Just hiring an attorney makes everything easier. Also, if a tenant sues you, right, you might want an attorney to represent you. Put it in your lease that the tenant is responsible for all attorney fees for you if there's a case involving them. The reason being is you're never going to need to go to court unless they've caused that situation, right? So make sure they're responsible for paying any attorney fees because they can add up quick, right? Attorneys charge a lot of money, $250, $400 an hour, $650, $1,000 an hour. It can go crazy, and right there can be a couple months profit, right? So make sure attorney fees are covered by the tenants. And the last thing is the abandonment clause. And this is important to have in your lease. We always had something like this in our lease where if a tenant vacates the property, you verified it, whether it be means of the utilities were shut off or no one's living there. Maybe there's signs of the fact that they vacated the property but never notified you, so they skipped out on the apartment. And so if there's any situations like that, you want to make sure you're covered to take repossession of the property so that you don't have to go through the full eviction scenario because they moved out. If they skipped out on the apartment, you want to be able to take possession of that property, change the locks, and start your process of re-renting. And so make sure you have an abandonment clause in your lease. If they move out, and verify it, whether it be utilities, whether it be that it's vacant and you can't get a hold of them. It's especially important if somebody didn't pay you rent that month, they're not calling you back. Go to the property and verify that they didn't skip out. I'll tell you what, it happens more than you think. You might think it doesn't happen all that often. It also depends on the number of units you have, right? If you're running 100 or 150 unit portfolio, it's going to happen, and it's going to happen more than you think it does. So just have that in your lease that if they abandon the property, what I used to always do is I'd put a notice on the front door, 3-day abandonment notice. We have verified that you have vacated this property. If we do not hear from you in 3 days, we're going to take possession of the property and change the locks. And 99% of the time, no one's going to call you because you've already verified that they moved, right? But that's just to protect you. You have that notice. You can take a picture with a timestamp of the notice on their front door. You left it up for 3 days, didn't hear from anybody. You verified the utilities. You peeked in and realized that it is vacant. So you have multiple ways to prove they moved out. And so you just want to make sure you don't have to go through the entire eviction process because there's still an actual legal binding lease in place for that property. So make sure you have an abandonment clause in your lease. I hope these help you in some way to at least give you some more security in your properties, that you're properly secured, that you're not going to have as many issues when it comes to legal means on your property. I hope it's helpful. And I hope you're successful in your properties. If you can do me a favor and click like or subscribe or comment on this video, it helps me a ton and I really appreciate it. Thank you for viewing this video, and I'll see you on the next one.